All right, last presentation of the day, Wildland Mayday from Damian Giuliani, captain from Encinitas Fire. Been in the fire service about 20 years. He's a member of FEMA Task Force 8 as a planning team manager, and he has many ICS quals, including SIT unit leader. Also owner of Zerod Resources, a corporation focused on wildland training and consulting. Damian developed this presentation while teaching land navigation and field observer courses in San Diego. Please welcome Damian Giuliani.
All right, first I'd like to thank you guys for having me here. I've been here one other time, and it's always been kind of an honor and something on the bucket list to be here doing this kind of thing, so I appreciate it. I'm going to continue with that kind of doom and gloom theme here. Unfortunately, a lot of what you're going to hear here is going to echo what we heard here today, and probably some of the things that you heard yesterday as well. So as far as this thing goes, so what we're going to go over here today, the Wildland Mayday itself. So what I'm going to do is just kind of break this down for you. Hopefully I can get you to be a believer in this. It's something that we do for structure fire, but we're going to kind of move it into the wildland, and we're going to tweak it a little bit. So we're going to do that in a couple different ways. We're going to support the operational need for a Wildland Mayday Protocol with some data and case studies. I'm not going to bore you with a ton of data. It's really the case studies and the things that you guys see out in the field and the things that you guys have experienced is really what kind of drives this forward. We're going to explain the use of established land navigation techniques. Really, it's just utilizing that GPS, simple land navigation techniques out in the field. We're getting into a lot of these things or these incidents now where people don't see themselves on a phone and a little blue dot, they don't know where they are. I mean, that's a pretty common thing. The GPS unit itself has become a lost art navigation tool. Never mind a compass and a map, right? So we're going to socialize the LAND acronym. Sorry, another acronym. But this one should be pretty similar to what we already know as far as lunar, laser, who, what, where, air. So if you're familiar with the structure fire Mayday, this shouldn't be that big of a jump. And then we're going to explain how the Wildland Mayday Protocol is incorporated into the entrapment planning and the IWI process. So some data that we mined when we looked at this, when we really started first putting this together. So this is in FireScope. It's in the final stages of approval, so it'll be in the FOG manual. What we did down in San Diego was kind of the guinea pig. We put hundreds of firefighters through this and had nothing but positive feedback. It's tweaked and morphed over the last 3 years, but I think I'm pretty comfortable with the final product. And this is really kind of the driving force behind it. So this is data that was published by NIFC and a Joint Fire Service program. So if you look at the national statistic of wildland firefighter fatalities, 21% are due to entrapments. In California, that number is actually a little bit higher. It's 43%. So they've been collecting data of wildland firefighter fatalities since 1926, and they have about 350. 150, actually, 2 of them now, are due to entrapments, yet we have no standard, or we really don't talk about it. We get in our fire shelter every year, right? We do that 30 seconds, but we really don't talk about what happens right before that. We really don't talk about what happens after that. We tell you what to expect when you're in that shelter, but we don't really talk about the things that surround that. And that's really where this training comes in. So the Entrapment Mayday Protocol, or the Wildland Mayday Protocol, is not the 9-line. It's not the 8-line. Okay, that's a well-established, well-oiled machine, been worked, it's vetted. This is a separate process in the event of a burnover, entrapment, or life-threatening situation. Okay, so it's a different protocol, and you're going to see how it kind of ties into everything. Is anybody here on the North Complex? North Complex, out the Dixie fire. Some campfire? All right, yeah. So it wouldn't be a wildland conference or a class without somebody's own personal 19th watch out, right? So my 19th watch out is unfamiliar with land navigation techniques and position not known. You need to know where you're at. I mean, that is like a bare minimum standard that we should all have. I always found it interesting that when you go to fire camp, they give you 2 things every morning. What are they? When you go to briefing, what are they? IEP and a what? And a map. But yet we don't have any classes that teach us how to read maps. PMS 475 is about as good as it gets. The North Complex had a 210,000 acre run in 15 hours. Started at night through timber. Mostly was the primary fuel. The only reason why it stopped is it ran out of fuel. That's going to scare the shit out of everybody in this room. But we're putting our people out in front of these fires and out in front of these areas and not giving them the skills to know where they're at. Okay, the structured fire mayday is a well-established communication process that has been vetted, it's been studied, we've looked at it, and it's something that is taught to every firefighter before they go out on that fire truck. The same concept should apply to the wildland. Okay? This is a great book one of my colleagues turned me on to. I can't save you, but I'll die trying. There's about 4 chapters in there that have to do with structured fire mayday. But the same concepts apply. They've been studying this since the 1980s. And the biggest takeaway here was that if you did not train your firefighters to declare mayday when they were in trouble, they will not do it. And there's a bunch of reasons why. There's stigma, no protocol. So if you don't actually have a protocol or a decision-making parameter that tells somebody to call a mayday or call for help when they're in trouble, they just won't do it. Okay? That stigma of, hey, if I call in a mayday, I call for help, that means I screwed up. Well, that might be the case. Yeah, you might have screwed up, but in today's fire environment, that isn't necessarily always the case. But we need to get past that anyway, whether that's a true statement or not. And that, obviously, those can do human factors, right? So all of these things are known. Again, since the 1980s, we've been looking at this, and we know these things to be true. So what are the decision-making parameters that we have out there for people to call to help when they're going to be burned over or trapped, okay? This book is one that I turn my students on if you wanted to bone up on your just basic wildland knowledge. Wildland Urban Interface Operating Principles by CAL FIRE. It's actually part of the Company Officer 2E curriculum as some of the as one of the books for the students to read. There's only one paragraph in that whole book that talks about a mayday, or as far as calling for help if you're trapped. It's on page 261. So this is verbiage we actually took and we just modified it a little bit for fire scope. So if the individual experiencing life-threatening situation makes a declaration, he or she should use the term mayday. So that's it. So basically what we did is we used that same thing. We also incorporated burnover and entrapment and then mayday protocol. Fire scope, well, initially when we started looking at this, well, we already have something that has to do with mayday and fire scope for wildland. Well, this was it. And I'm like, no, not really. This is buried in like a 3-page document. So they do mention the word mayday and emergency traffic to be used in those types of situations. But again, you're not going to mine through this document for that kind of communication process. It needs to be short, concise, and to the point. The IRPG has last resort survival, page 32 and 33, which is great stuff. My only real issue with it, all this is great information, but the last 2 sentences, do not expect radio communication capabilities and do not expect water or retardant from aerial resources. I get that. Radios may not work in your fire shelter. GPSs, I know, don't work in a fire shelter. As soon as you put one of those GPS units underneath the fire shelter, the signal goes away. But if we don't teach our people how to talk to aircraft, what to say in the event of an emergency, are they going to do it? No, probably not. Okay, and that goes back to studies that we've learned from the structured fire mayday. Okay, when we talk about blow up to burnover, in this instance, we're talking about situational awareness, and really what we're talking about is entrapment avoidance. Entrapment avoidance doesn't always work. It is our go-to, 99.9% of the time, yes it is. But we don't talk about that small sliver of percentage of what do you do when entrapment avoidance fails. What does that sound like? What does that look like? Who am I talking to? What radio channel am I supposed to be on? What's the right way? Okay, a lot of these people that are going out and these firefighters that are going, they don't have that skill set that a lot of you in this room have. They just don't. They need to be told on these are the kind of the things that you need to be looking for. These are the things that you need to be thinking about when you're out on the line. So we kind of get past avoidance and we actually start talking about an entrapment plan. What do you do when your entrapment avoidance fails? Okay, so we all know the definition of an avoidance. But really, once now you're trapped, what is your plan? How are you going to communicate that plan? What are you asking for? So this was the Indians Basin fire, quick little, I was burned over, 5 hot shots. This was the same fire wind event, so kind of tying into some of the fire behavior speeches that we were having today. So this is a video of a vortex that came over on top of us. I would tell you right now, I preached it in my class. If LCES was not in place, I would not be standing here right now. So this is we were underneath this. So that woke me up a bit. I didn't tell my wife about that for years after it happened. I mean, it was just something that I just kind of left out when she asked about like how my assignment went. That was on the Indian Basin Fire, 2007. So there was Tango Tango. So you guys remember maybe that Cleveland National Forest? It was kind of really one of the first times we saw that fire vortex. They started talking about and they had the video, that engine that was burned over. We were on the other side of the fire. That same north wind came down, pushed that fire down on top of us. They basically forced the hand. I was actually down in the drainage with 5 hot shots from Little Tahunga, and I was acting as their lookout. They started screaming on the radio, "Hey, you guys need to move through your escape route, get your safety zone." Well, it wasn't a safety zone, it's more like a TRA. But back then, even now, I have a high level of respect for hot shots. And when you see hot shots starting to run, that's usually a bad sign, right? So I dropped what I had, and I fell right in. And I tell you, the scariest I've ever been. You can't breathe, you can't see. And when you feel your skin start to burn and you can't hear anything because it sounds like a freight train's coming on top of you, it'll change the way you think about shit. It just, I have a little bit of a potty mouth, so just stick with me. So anyway, I started kind of really going down this LAND acronym and location actions needs designator and teach it to my students little by little. It kind of morphed into some stuff, and then now it's in San Diego and in Fire Scope. So getting in a little bit about the importance of it. So the El Monte Fire Rescue, you see that little dot there on the screen, that's a helicopter. This was in 2010. I've talked to Hair Attack Group supervisors, I've talked to Helcos, I've talked to Hot Shots, I've talked to pretty much anybody I could about how this would work out in the field. So in this particular instance, the El Monte fire, there were 2 hikers cut off by fire. The actuator pilot that I talked to is that little dot in the center in that smoke screen there, or that smoke picture. He was assigned to go find these 2 hikers. So he's out trying to find the hikers, could not find them, and then had the thought to say, hey, well, I'm going to ask dispatch and see if they actually have a GPS coordinate pinged to his phone, or pinged to their phone. Gets the coordinates from the dispatch, he plugs them into his GPS, and he flies right to the 2 people, pulls them off the mountain. And his quote was, if it wasn't for the GPS coordinates, I would have found them, they would have been murdered. They would have died. So, again, those coordinates are important. Now, I'm not saying that any time that you declare a Mayday, you got to give your location, you got to give coordinates. If you can articulate where you are in a simple way for aircraft or whoever your would-be rescuer is to, or just to tell people where you're at. Odds are, if you're in this situation, you're declaring a Mayday, you're going to be burned over. Right? If you're lucky, aircraft is around that might be able to assist you. But really what you're doing is you're setting that incident with an incident commander up for success. Better? There we go. So you're setting that incident with an incident commander up for success. For them to know where you are, they can start that ball moving a lot sooner. Okay? You guys remember the car fire, Jeremy Stoke, right? Fire inspector going down door to door trying to evacuate. He was on a street and could not articulate where he was. Burned over, killed. They didn't find Jeremy till the next day. All right. So they tried pinging his cell phone, didn't work. Whatever, maybe his location services were off. So I always tell my students, depending on technology to tell people where you're at, it's like basing your primary plan off aircraft. Doesn't always work. It's great when it's there, but it doesn't always work. Does anybody here know the boat fire, Conception fire? 34 people died on that fire, if you don't know. Okay? So this is off the coast of Santa Barbara. I would say that the Coast Guard are subject matter experts in wide area search as far as trying to find something out in the middle of nowhere with no landmarks. We're going to listen to the Conception Fire Mayday. So you're going to hear the boat captain. He's going to give a mayday, but specifically I want you to listen to what the dispatcher asks the captain. He knows he may only have 2 minutes with him or less.
That's on the stress. This is Coast Guard Sector Los Angeles on count 1-6. What is your position and number of persons on board? Over. That's on the stress. Coast Guard Sector Los Angeles. Roger, you have 29 persons on board and you can breathe. What is your current GPS position? Over.
So 2 big questions. We already kind of talked about the coordinates, right? Right? The second one is how many persons on board? Why does he want to know that? What's the sand resources? That same rule apply out in the wildland? Andy Palmer, Iron Complex, right? Almost 4 hours to get one guy off the side of a hill. Now imagine that's an engine company or a strike team or a hotshot crew. Okay? Think of that incident, when the incident, the resources and the coordinations they had to take. The more intel that I have when that happens as an incident with incident commander, the better that operation is going to run. Harris Fire burnover. This is Brooke. So she gave me permission to use this. Down at the bottom is a picture of Brooke in the burn ICU. So if you haven't remember the story of the Harris fires in 2007, one civilian was killed and Brooke was severely burned and one of the firefighters were. So the way the story goes, this was initial attack, Harris fire. This 3387 comes upon 2 civilians. Civilians get into the engine, and it's a dad and a teenage son. The fire gets overtaken by fire, and they're going to listen to the radio traffic that Brooke broadcast, and I'll tell you the rest of the story after that.
Conversation recorded on October 21st, 2007 at 12:28 on channel 1.
Monitor your local go to your traffic.
So the reason why Brooke doesn't respond is because when I talked to her, she said that you hear all that yelling in the background, and when she said, "Oh shit," that's when every window in that fire engine blew out. They bailed out. Brooke grabbed the teenager, threw her fire shelter over her and the teenager. They went one way. The father jumped out the other side of the rig, went to the front of the engine. He was hit by fire and killed. When I talked to her, she said she years later had listened to this radio traffic, and she said, "I didn't know what to say on the radio. I just felt like I had to say something, that I needed to tell somebody that we were in trouble so they knew where we were." And so I asked her, "Well, if you had a structured communication process, would that help?" She goes, "Well, absolutely." Well, yeah, if somebody would have told me what to say, then that would have made things a lot easier, in this situation. So we really don't need to talk a lot about Granite Mountain. Everybody understands that. But I use this as an example because this is the best communication we have of an entrapment prior to a shelter deployment on a wildland fire. So we're going to listen to it. But listen to it in the context of a mayday. A lot of you, has everybody heard this before? Probably almost everybody in this room. This came out in like 2014, no? All right, that's awesome. So you're actually going to listen, if you've seen the movie, it's a little bit different. It's not exactly the way they portrayed in the movie, obviously. Okay? But we're going to listen to that last 2 minutes of radio traffic, and just by the conversation we're going to have here, you're going to get some takeaways out of it. So we're listening to it when we talk about it.
Got fire right over here now. Is
Okay, now the video is going to move a couple minutes forward now. So according to the final investigation report, there was a DC-10 flying over the southwest part of that fire. So obviously they never dropped, right? And I'm not here to saying that an airdrop would have saved these guys. That's not the whole point of this. The point is that all we're trying to do is increase percentages, okay? And if there is that Hail Mary of an aircraft flying over, you'd be damned, I'm going to be asking for it, right? One of the reasons why I put the timer up there, it was 2 minutes before they recognized or realized what those guys needed and wanted. And based off our last presenter, there wasn't a lot of radio traffic, remember? He was talking about that radio traffic. They had radio communications. Thank God Ops had a little bit of a little bit of a heads up. At one point told Granite Mountain, shut up, right? And did you guys notice when Eric came back and he lowered the octave in his voice after he told him to stop screaming so the guy would actually listen to him? Okay, that kind of communication process isn't right. We can make that better. And I'll tell you, from training this and putting hundreds of guys through this, we do some complex scenario where we have those radios all moving at the same time. And so air to ground, TAC, and command are all firing off at the same time. And I tell you, when you hear Mayday, Mayday, Mayday split through that traffic, everybody shuts up and they listen. That's the reason behind that. That's why we do that. That's why we do instruction fires. Why do you think less structure firefighters are dying in these kind of scenarios? Because we're training them, we're showing them the right way. Okay. Kincaid shelter deployment. Did anyone see this? Okay. So the Kincaid shelter deployment, division group supervisor was burned over, shelter deployment with two civilians again, right? Was cut off by fire, contacts Helco. Helco comes out, says he can't find him, gives him GPS coordinates, finds him, yeah, you're in a bad spot, you ain't getting out of there. All right? No shit. So he starts to go down, forget this Circle 8 lane, he runs into two civilians. Well, if he's trapped, they're trapped. All right? So he comes up with an entrapment plan. He actually starts a firing operation, and he does a burnout around this house. Fire's coming from the southwest. House catches on fire. Both he and the two civilians get in one fire shelter, and they go on the backside of that house. During this time, because he had enough time, and he recognized, he came up with a plan. From the time that he made his first radio communications to the time that they were burned over was 20 minutes. So you can compress and decompress this time frame as much as you want. So the fire starts to light off the house, starts to get hot, and then they end up moving the fire shelter to where you see that green triangle. So it starts in the red, moves to the green. During this whole deployment, there was 15 bucket drops dropped around at the deployment site to keep it cool and keep it survivable. They walked away with minor injuries. So an entrapment plan, knowing where you're at and having obviously everything lined up perfect for these guys, and they had the aircraft and everything else, but again, that's the whole point. We're trying to increase percentages. So what does this look like? So the land navigation, wildland, it's pretty easy to remember, but again, based off lunar. So Mayday, 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 situation report is just that intended receiver and sender communication. Air attack 330 from brush 334, but Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. We're going to be burned over in 3 minutes. Hopefully you get that response back, not like from Bravo 33, but from air attack that says, go ahead 234, it's your Mayday. Location. So again, you don't have to give position coordinates. If I can articulate that, hey, I'm on Circle 8 lane, about a half mile from there, you're going to see a hose lay with a red barn, go to it. That's where I'm at. Copy that. I know where you are. But in the absence of being able to articulate where you are, you need to be able to give GPS coordinates. I carry a GPS on my web gear, and the map page displays the coordinates. I have an impromptu geo-tracker. If I have a radio and a GPS, that's your geo-tracker right there. And now I'm getting information to the resources that I need now versus waiting for some magical device to go through the incident and get back to me. Actions. What actions are you taking to mitigate the entrapment? What do you need to mitigate the entrapment? And then your designator and how many. And that kind of goes to that resource piece, right? Who are you and how many people are we going to need to be able to facilitate that incident within an incident? So where does this go with that geo-tracker? So I had mentioned the geo-tracker and the Holy Grail, right? The file, and that's really not a geo-tracker. I think the Holy Grail is for us, you know, if you're going to relate it to anything, it's that process. So if we did have this imaginary geo-tracker, right, which will come, and I've done some consulting with some pretty big companies, it's coming, okay? But the Wildland Mayday communication process is the foundation. Okay, so this alert would go out to some satellite device, go to the incident command post. At the same time, we should talk about Techno Silva, we've talked about ATAC here. That same information would go out into the field. Simultaneously, I'm going to have an established communication process, and I'm going to be talking that Mayday. Location, actions, needs, and designator. While all this is happening simultaneously. So, now, between the incident command post, your supervision, you can get those rescue resources. Those rescue resources may now know that you're in trouble. Now you're talking directly to them. You're going to get in that shelter. You're going to be burned over. Okay? But can we get you help faster? So again, this was just kind of a brief overview of what the Wildland Mayday Protocol looks like. But I'm going to tell you, when we start training this with people, you start to come up with these side effects that you never saw before. So when you talk about case studies, you start educating them, giving them slides. Fireline leadership. We didn't know that that was even a thing with this. We knew somebody had to be in charge of the deployment, But the more organized the crews were, and the more they understood of who they were supposed to be talking to, what channels they were supposed to be talking on, when it came time for the entrapment went 1,000 times smoother. When they were disorganized, they scattered like rats. Nobody knew where to go, nobody knew what to do. That fire line leadership component is huge. It's decentralized command. It's something that we already know in the military to be a best practice. VHF radio practices. Them understanding that if I only have one radio and I'm scanning 3 channels, if they're all lighting off at the same time, at best, I'm getting 1/3 of that radio traffic. The higher I am up in a leadership position is the more I need to be able to monitor those radio channels or grab somebody else to help me do that. So all of these things really come out when you start training this because we've never done it before. But we need to. They say it in the structured fire world, applies to us. The first time you declare a Mayday should not be on a real incident. It should be in a training exercise. Because if you don't do it in a training exercise, you're not going to do it in real life. Any questions?
President,
Yes, sir.
can't radio broadcast the GPS position?
Yes. So talking to some comms people, you can actually broadcast VHF. A VHF signal can carry GPS position. It's just the repeater on the back end. I'm not talking to my comms guys over there, but there's and it's not. It's a hardware issue and a software issue. So the newer BKs, I think the newer ones all can transmit a GPS over VHF. So that's something we are looking at. Because really it needs to be a redundant system, right? Cell phones don't always work. Satellite may or may not always work. Radios may always work. So the more we can build redundancy into the system, the better or the more useful the technology of the tool. So but yeah, you're 100% right. That is being looked at. Any other questions?
Hey, Damian, how far along in Firescope is this?
It's in the final process. So basically where it sits right now, it's been going through this process for about 3 years. So in this process, it's gone through the GIS specialist group, it's gone through the comms group, the safety group. I have a meeting next week with the Wildland subcommittee group, because the goal was to make sure that when this thing comes out, that it's been looked at by a bunch of different people. So after that, then it'll go back to the ops group for approval, and then it'll get socialized at the task force level, and then the board of director level. So I'm hoping this will be done by the end of the year in Firescope. But then now what about state fire training? What about NWCG? Okay, but in California, this will be something that you will hear on the radio. Anything else? Good question. All right, that's my time.
Good stuff, good stuff.